Hello again to my students. I was trying to find something on thesis sentences for you, and I don't like any of the online videos on thesis sentences, so I thought I would just talk to you about them for now, and and we'll go over this in class. But I want you to kind of have something to watch, okay, and to think about thesis sentences. So a thesis sentence is it's a sentence usually at the beginning. Usually at the ending of your first paragraph. Okay, so when you write an introduction, okay, it's kind of think of it as a funnel shape. Okay, so it starts out sort of generally. You'll have your opening sentence that's an attention grabber, right? Like that one we heard the other day about plagiarism, and plagiarism being a seductive trap luring the unsuspecting student to satisfy the ravaging appetites of their professors. Okay, so that's a really good attention getter, right? And then what you'll do is you will gradually narrow down your focus. Okay, and the thesis sentence is the last sentence of your opening paragraph that tells the reader exactly what you're going to talk about. Now, when you get more to be a more experienced writer, you can write more general thesis sentences, as a rule. But frankly, the reader likes to know what you're gonna talk about, right? They want to know exactly what you're going to talk about. They don't want to have kind of a general, vague idea. They want to cut to the chase pretty quickly. Okay, and so by telling them exactly what you're going to talk about, so for you guys, you'll be writing relatively short papers, probably about I don't know, 6, 7 paragraphs or whatever. And you'll have basically 2 or 3 main points that you're going to be talking about. You can't really talk about more than that in a paper anyway. Even if you're writing a long dissertation, you want to focus on 1 or 2 aspects of the subject you're talking about or researching. Okay? So the thesis sentence should say exactly what it is you're going to talk about. Okay? So if you are writing about let's say collies. Say you're going to write about collies as pets, okay? And so your main points might be that collies are good around kids, right? Even though they're large dogs, they're good around children, okay? They're fluffy, and they're nice to pet, and they're fun to play with, okay? And also, they're herding dogs, and so you can count on them to watch your children, to let your children know. You remember the Lassie, all the jokes about the Lassie show. What is it, girl? What where's Timmy? Oh, he's down by the river. Oh no, let's go find him. Okay, that's sort of accurate because collies are herding dogs. That's what they're bred for, to herd, sheep around, to herd cattle around. And so maybe that's one of your main points of your paper. Okay, so they're fluffy, they're good with kids, but most importantly, they're herding dogs. Okay, so you're going to talk about those 3 things in your paper. Okay, so you'll want to say that in your thesis sentence, right? So you'll open up with something. Maybe you'll open up with a story about Lassie, right? And about how they're you've heard the jokes frequently on TV shows about Lassie coming and telling someone about Timmy being down by the old mill, and showing the person where he is. And then you would talk generally about collies, right? Or you would talk about dogs in general. And then you get more and more focused, and then you have the thesis sentence that says, collies are excellent dogs, especially if you have children, because they're fluffy, they like to play, and children like to play with them. They are patient and good with children, and moreover, they can herd, they will herd, H-E-R-D, children, and they keep an eye on the children, okay, because they're bred for herding. And then in each subsequent paragraph or section of your paper, that's what you're going to talk about. So you're going to talk about them being fluffy and how kids like to play with them, and you'll write a paragraph or 2 on that, and you'll give some more details. Maybe you'll give some personal experience, okay? And then your second section, okay, will be that they're good with kids and they're very patient and they don't bite, and you might contrast it with other dogs, that aren't so patient with kids and that do bite, Rottweilers or German Shepherds or Pit Bulls, okay? And then your third section will be, about how they're herding dogs. And you would, again, give some examples possibly, and again, maybe some examples from TV, but also some examples from real life, okay? Then anything that you can't make fit into one of those sections won't go in your paper, okay, because it's going to be extraneous information. Or you need to go back and rewrite your thesis, okay? So say you find out something else about collies that's really important and is more important than the fact that kids like to play with them, okay? So then you would cross that out, okay, from your paper, and you would replace it with the other section, okay, whatever you've learned about collies, all right? And then you would rewrite your thesis sentence to reflect that. So your thesis sentence isn't written in stone, okay, until you turn in the final paper. But you'll need to make sure that your thesis sentence matches your main points, all right? So if you decide to change one of your main points, you need to go back and change your thesis sentence, okay? Again, as you get to be more experienced writers, you won't necessarily have to write in a thesis sentence that's exactly, matches everything in the paper. But it's a pretty good idea, okay? Especially for readers, especially if you're writing something that's meant to be informative or persuasive, right? So if you're writing a short story, that's not so important. But if you're writing a paper, and let's say you're writing an article, and it's going to be published somewhere, okay? And people want to know quickly if your article is something that they're going to be interested in. So they're going to look for the thesis sentence, okay? I'm going to show you shortly how to read quickly for information. And one of the things you want to do is always look for the thesis sentence. Now, not every field has thesis sentences. So, for example, I took a graduate level psychology course, right? And I was reading about experiments and things. And they don't cut to the chase. You have to read the whole stinking article to figure out, what the result was of this experiment that they did, right? So you know generally what the experiment was about, but you wouldn't know about the results of it until you got way into the middle. Well, for someone that's reading quickly for information, especially for a student that's reading quickly for information, that's a very frustrating thing, right? So it's kind of a courtesy to the reader to tell them in an interesting way, right? I really hate papers that say, well, now talk about A, B, and C, right? So you need to write a graceful thesis sentence, without saying, I will now talk about this, this, and this, or in my paper, I will prove that this happens, and blah, 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 right? So you want to write a graceful thesis sentence, but you also want to say, these are things I'm going to talk about. So collies are excellent. Collies make excellent pets because they're good with children, they're fun to play with, and they're herding dogs, and so they can help you keep an eye on your kids, right? So that's a little bit more graceful than saying, I'm going to tell you about why collies make good pets, okay? It needs to flow with the paper, okay? So you can do that as what I call a working thesis sentence. So you can say, when you're doing your working thesis, you can say, I'm going to talk about this, this, and this. But you'll need to eventually rewrite it so that it's more graceful. And I don't like papers that draw attention themselves as student papers, okay? I like to think of these as articles that you're writing to inform someone about something, okay? So you're going to write cause and effect papers pretty soon. And so one of the things you'll do in a cause and effect paper is to say, smoking has many effects, many bad effects on a person's health, such as, and then you could talk about things like, cancer. Cancer's a pretty big one, right? Talk about lung cancer. Talk about, the people who, you see those commercials for people who are like missing part of their throat because they smoke for so long. And so, but that's not lung cancer, but it is a form of cancer. It's a form of throat cancer. So you could say smoking can cause many cancers, including lung cancer and throat cancer and it can cause cancers that spread. My mother died of lung cancer, but it had spread all through her body, right? And so you can talk about that as cause and effect. And that would be your thesis sentence. That would be the last sentence of your opening paragraph, and then you would go into more detail throughout. Okay? And then when you get to the conclusion, so this is a little bit of introduction and conclusion work as well, right? But when you get to the conclusion, it's kind of a reverse funnel. So it's kind of like this, right? And so you're going to go from the last paragraph, which is very specific, and then out to something very general again, okay? And then you'll leave the reader with something to think about, maybe a call to action, maybe a quote. You might start your paper off with a story, okay? And then, so you would tell a little bit of the story, and then at the end you would tell the rest of the story. That's what's called a framing device, okay? Because it frames the entire paper, okay? But you should never, ever, ever give any new information in the conclusion, okay? That the conclusion is just a summary. So you'll summarize your main points. You'll talk about, your thesis sentence in light of the new information that you've given the reader, okay? So think of the thesis, or think of the first sentence of the conclusion as saying, so as you can see, don't actually say that, because I hate things that draw attention to the fact that you've just written a paper. But, that's what you should basically think of it as. So as you can see, I've written about this and this, and I've given you these reasons, okay? And then you'll leave the reader with something to think about. But never, ever, ever introduce new information into the conclusion. All right? It's very important. If you need to introduce more information, then you introduce it fully and you make that a body paragraph. Okay? So, we have talked about, in conclusion, introductions and conclusions. And most importantly, we've talked about thesis sentences and how to write a thesis sentence that's appropriate for Comp 1. Okay? And really, I've really come to see that writing a good thesis sentence, and a thesis sentence that does tell your reader what you're going to talk about in advance, is very useful. So, all right, I will see you in class.